A man without a name, swallowed by the void, only to return as an abomination, a dark shadow of his former self, imbued by the powers he's condemned to fight against, to lift this curse, and to find sweet oblivion. Awakened now from breathless sleep, the cold desert wind caressing his numb face, strange, devoid of life, and imbued by unnatural energies, he is the undead gunslinger, doomed to roam the barren lands until the curse is purged once and for all. A dead man walking. We wake up, right next to what was supposed to be our final resting place. The gloomy, unending night covers the palely lit desert that surrounds us. A totem is blinding us with its fiery eyes, pulsating with unnatural energies. There is a strange reason for our return, but it's unknown to us. We're brought back without any regards to who we are, or better said, were. The land is cursed, and so are we. The moonlit desert infested with undead abominations, animated by an unknown energy. We have to break the curse, if nothing else, to rid ourselves of the wretched fate of mindless immortality. Bloodwest is a first-person stealth shooter with RPG elements that came out of early access recently. This game escapes simple definitions, as it borrows from so many different influences, systems, and genres, just to brew all of those different strains of gameplay into a unique experience. It's a horror-imbued, atmospheric, stealth FPS that is heavily influenced by games like Thief and Stalker. I would even argue that you can feel the influence or at least similarity to some titles like New Vegas and Cultic, among other things. While Bloodwest is certainly not earning any awards for its graphics anytime soon, I'd argue that the graphics are more than suited for what the game is set out to do. The atmosphere the graphics conjure, the low-poly environments that are tastefully and masterfully enhanced by a unique and interesting art style remind me of Cultic, another game where the technically unimpressive graphics are absolutely enhanced by the artistic vision that the developer managed to create. And honestly, looking back at Bloodwest after beating it for this review, I can't imagine a better looking graphical solution to what the game is set out to do. The environments are gloomy, rich with atmosphere, a strange blend of horror and western come to life. This is somewhat similar to Darkwood, another great game that is an absolute masterpiece of doing the most with the simplest of graphics. Bloodwest greets you with a desert shrouded in eternal night, bloody rituals and characters inspired by true historical America. The first thing I was impressed with was the feel and tightness of the weapons. Headshots are gory and rewarding, arrows can be recovered from corpses and can even be found in the environment if you missed and shot them into another object. The love for detail is abundant and skillfully implemented into the technical framework. The enemies, well designed and surprisingly well animated, are especially tailored for the setting. While we have seen countless versions of mostly similar undead and other creatures in many games and settings, Bloodwest takes a unique spin on their whole appearance. Take the Birdman as an example. It looks very human, especially from the distance, but when you get closer you hear bird screeches, you see the unholy merging between animal, demon and human, all while still resembling someone who might actually call this time and place their home. Nothing I've seen in Bloodwest feels out of place, unsuited or immersion breaking. This is the Wild West under demonic influence, and therefore, everything that is inherently unbelievable in the setting blends into the believable historical background of an authentic framework. The game introduces its systems gradually. After a very short tutorial and some dialogue, we are left to our own devices. I like this hands-off approach. Here's the world, here's a rough idea of what you need to do, now explore and enjoy. A very effective way of doing things, but only if the initial gameplay loop is fun enough to form an interest in the player. And Bloodwest does a very good job at that. The shaman whom you first meet is also a trader. The game immediately offers some rewarding and interesting items for sale. Items that can define a whole playstyle. This is good for two reasons. First, it gives the player an idea, a goal of something he might work towards, so something that is not directly tied to quests or missions. And second, the items are expensive, especially at the beginning of the game, and you're forced to make a meaningful choice of how you want to build your gunslinger. I'm immediately drawn to the bow. A stealth-based approach which combines sneaking with precise headshots to deal with most enemies without a direct confrontation. The trader offers us a spirit bow, a magical bow which requires no arrows but gradually drains HP with every shot. Another meaningful choice: run the risk of running out of ammo, of arrows breaking on pickup, or sacrifice some HP for each shot, but make them count, especially since you will literally pay with your own blood. You might save some cash that way though. Since cash is unavoidable, even for an undead cowboy in the Wild West apocalypse, we make our way into the desert to make enough money for the Eldritch Bow, which will complement our stealth-based approach. There is an abandoned fort nearby. We figure this might be our best idea to find some items to trade. We sneak into the fort, taking out as many abominations as possible along the way, while gathering anything that might seem useful or worth something to traders. Sticking to the shadows and unseen corners, we manage to navigate the fort without too many issues. It's quite clear that our enemies are not the most skilled when it comes to detecting our hidden movements, which is understandable. There might be a slight loss of eyesight and perception that comes with being undead. However, our expedition leads to our first death. While we are technically immortal, every death leads to the buildup of a curse which weakens our current state. So this might as well be a good moment to dive into the artifact and curse system, which are closely interconnected and designed to be complementary. If you die in Bloodvest, you receive a curse, a debuff that can be removed either by specific rare and expensive potions, or if you die 3 times you can get a simple quest to remove the curse completely. This system seems to find the sweet spot of being punishing enough, making you actively avoid deaths and discouraging making runs, running past enemies or just gathering items in a cheesy way. There also seems to be no clear upper limit to the curses. If you die 6 times you will gain 2 full-blown curses. However, the one thing I noticed is that there is no real reason to not die 2 more times once you die once, just to complete the curse and get a rather easy quest to remove it. I actively avoid cheesing or breaking games, so I refrain from doing that for now. A simple and well-designed system that just works. That would be the shortest way to describe what artifacts do in Bloodvest. Think of artifacts as a similar system to Stalker. You find specific items that give you boons, sometimes also disadvantages, which you can equip to give yourself specific effects. You have 3 available slots for those, and you are left to combine them as you wish. Some of the items stack, others don't. The system, while great on its own as well, becomes even more interesting when you combine them with the absolutely top tier item and weapon design. Here's an example of a combination I was running. The Spirit Bow drains HP for every shot, so I used a Wendigo Heart, later a Deathstalker Heart, which gradually restores your HP, while also giving other benefits. This way I could combat the constant drain on my HP without using too many healing items after every combat encounter. Along with that, I used several items that increase my stamina and stealth, and this way I created a totally unique, never before seen approach to playing an RPG. A stealth archer. The Spirit Bow itself, along with other equipment you can find or buy, are prime examples of a well thought out itemization system. This system is not a linear upgrade system, where you just might find the same items in stronger variants, although there are some of those as well, but the weapons usually have a unique twist to them that gives more flavor and flows into a specific playstyle. Weapons that deal more damage to specific enemies, that grant bonuses, do more damage when you headshot, or punish you with HP loss if you miss a shot. Bloodvest is a great example of how you can design a system that is not insanely rich with items, but how those items can be designed to be unique, memorable, and much more fun than what you might find in a game with your standard ARPG itemization formula. The final system which completes this very well thought out, interconnected framework are the perks. You gain XP by killing enemies and level up. Once you have gained a level, you can spend your perk points. Perks are much more specific and complement the way you want to play your game. In a broader perspective, a good perk system is one that offers you the ability to generalize or specialize your character. Very good systems, like the one in Underrail for example, offer you both of these pathways during the development of your character. There's nothing too surprising here in Bloodvest. Buff your HP, resistances, stealth, inventory space, weapon sway, and accuracy. The one thing I found good about those is that I really haven't seen any that are useless, and my only critique in this specific aspect is that there could have been more perks. This would force you to make tougher choices, since by the end game I found myself having everything that I really wanted out of the perks. I found myself realizing a very strange thing. I actually enjoyed the inventory system in Bloodwest, especially the inventory shuffling you're forced to do. This game has limited inventory space and also limits you to 2 different size slots for weapons, so you can basically only have an active main weapon and secondary weapon. You can have additional equipment, but you will have to sacrifice inventory space. I've been known to hate certain inventory shuffling simulators, especially the uncrowned king of them all, Escape from Tarkov. Therefore it was very strange for me to enjoy this. Even in older games that have no monetizing incentive connected to inventory space, like Diablo 2, the limited inventory space was rather more frustrating than fun. And then it actually dawned on me, I enjoy it because it makes your life difficult enough to pose a challenge, but it is inherently fair. You can buy additional bags that fit into your original inventory space and you can open those and use them. I've only seen them with traders, except for one case where I found a bag out in the world. There's also a perk that will increase your inventory size and, another great idea, the amount certain items are able to stack up to in your inventory. Too many games today miss that crucial sweet spot and balance for all of its systems, but more often than not, inventory space is the first victim of bad design choices. It has to be challenging enough to not be ignored as a system altogether, but fair enough to provide progress. There are extreme examples on both sides. Gothic takes away all inventory management, giving you endless inventory space to carry around your items without any regard to anything. This is not a big issue, since the rest of the game is interesting enough for it to not matter too much. But certainly, even with Gothic, that could have been solved in a better way. On the other side, we have games like Escape from Tarkov, with an obvious choice to make it as tiresome as possible because you can buy inventory space through better editions of the game. But even with this monetizing motive, the inventory is more of a hassle than anything else. Another absolutely unexpected but very much welcome feature in a game like this are the item animations. These have a dual purpose. Firstly, from a gameplay perspective, they do limit the way you interact with items. Games like Gothic, again, realized this a long time ago, and it is especially important to combat the arcadey nature of using healing items in some of these games. I never was a fan of the whole Diablo 2 approach to things, chug a million potions per fight instantly. Bloodwest will not allow you to do that. You can do potions and bandages in combat if you're smart enough, but you're also limited to how many, since you only have 3 active slots for these items, and when you run out of them, you will have to dig through your inventory, which will get you killed more often than not. Bloodwest often forces you to change your approach to dealing with specific situations or enemies. Stealth headshots worked well for me, but there are several enemies that wear masks and that will basically negate your first shot, forcing you to reveal your position to them. Other enemies can be fatigued by running away from them, giving you an opportunity to deal with them easier if you have good stamina management. Several enemies have special attacks, they might have pack behavior, or are only common in special biomes or areas of the map where they have the advantage. This design forces you to change your approach and to have more tools to deal with them ready at any moment. I also very much appreciated the fact that you seem to be very fragile in direct combat with multiple enemies, at least if you focus on a stealth build like I did. Apart from enriching the core gameplay, these things are another way of embracing the immersive approach Bloodwest generally takes. Let's take a look at some atmospheric shots.
I rid this land of you. Get into my gun already.
This brings me to another topic that I want to address. It is quite clear that the developers behind Bloodvest understand environmental storytelling very well. You can piece together certain themes from the environment, and certain stories the developer wanted you to understand are presented in this indirect and non-invasive way, further enriching your experiences in the game world. Another thing I appreciate about Bloodvest is that it's obviously a game that respects the player. There are no BS systems or crutches that treat the player like they're incapable of understanding the game or navigating the game world. And such things are such a prevalent feature in gaming today. No hand holding here, and that's just the way I like it. This can be seen in the small details, like the items. It's easy enough to spot items that you can pick up, but they are not highlighted in such an apparent and distasteful way that it would break the immersion the game creates or just look silly. A small critique that I would like to mention, although it's a rather subjective judgment, are the objective markers on the map. I generally dislike objective markers, especially since it's a design choice that is almost always created at the expense of other design choices for that particular game. For example, objective and quest markers tune down the need for NPC dialogue, that is the exposition the quest givers give you to be able to find your objectives. I would also argue that the stealth system is a little bit too forgiving. It's a simple system that filters if an enemy can hear or see you. Hiding from them will reset the meter so you will be able to continue on. With the perks that buff sneaking, along with some items and artifacts, it's pretty easy to be so proficient at it that you can literally stand right next to an enemy and they, for the most part, will have a very hard time spotting you. Another personal preference for the most part, but I would like sneaking to be a little less viable. And now, let's take a look at the story, so here is a timestamp to skip any possible spoilers. The game is divided into 3 major acts. You are mysteriously awoken and resurrected as an undead errand boy to demonic energies you don't understand. The only thing you comprehend and are informed about is that there is a curse that needs to be broken and that even your own redemption, or better said final rest, depends on breaking said curse. You meet several NPCs which mostly act as traders and offer a little exposition. You generally interact with the Shaman, the Totem of Souls, and Jim Hopper. This chapter has you gather several cursed artifacts and bring them to the Totem of Souls so that the totem can determine the origin of the curse. After exploring several locations that range from Native American graveyards to desecrated churches, you find the final boss of this chapter, the Mother of Roots. The boss is rather simple. It attacks with waves of roots, a single homing root, and it summons spirits. It periodically shows its heart that you have to shoot to defeat it. The second chapter is a swamp. It features mostly the same enemies that are flavored to the environment. Most of them have new attacks and skills as well, so that there is really not too much enemy repetition. You have slightly more NPC interactions in this chapter. You meet Annabelle, your first trader, and later free 2 other NPCs during your missions. The other 2 NPCs are a child and a priest. It's obvious that Annabelle and the priest are suffering from a disease, and you have a small mission to find a cure for them and choose whom you want to give the cure to. Your general mission is to find the remains of another undead gunslinger so you can resurrect him and find a way to defeat the final boss, which appears halfway through the chapter. I have no idea what the name of this boss is, so I'll just call him Big Weird 3 Dude. This boss was actually easier than the first one, and it's mostly a straightforward fight of luring the boss into traps and shooting him in the face. The undead gunslinger encourages you to escape from the influence of the totem, and you both leave to try to find your way to freedom. The third chapter follows you and your undead friend on your quest to free yourself from the influence of the totem and whatever dark power it might hide. The mountains with the remains of remote mining towns are the stage where your final encounter will be set. The undead and the doctor, another NPC you meet, send you out once again to collect the items which will open an ominous passage that leads into the mountains. With that, you are faced by the totem once again, which turns into an eldritch beast, gives you a villainy dialogue about you being deceived the whole time, and attacks you. After slaying the demon, we are once again informed that we are cursed and undead, doomed to roam the land without any real resolve. The ending somewhat reminds me of Fallout 1, without the depth of the real consequence of being shunned to roam the endless wastes after saving your vault. This way, you're just another undead that is unable to break free from the totem energies. It's quite clear and very obvious from the start that the story isn't the selling point of the game. But the story most definitely is the weakest point of the game. It has a great premise and setup, but the way it develops and leads you through the game leaves many things to be desired. It really should not be seen as anything else but a rough framework for you to explore the world. While that is fine, it is important to point out for anyone that expects something more substantial out of the plot, there are many things that are done so well in Bloodwest, many things that are just following the rule of cool and seem to fit into everything else with ease. However, the story should not be seen as anything more than a framework, a skeleton if you will, which is covered by layers of great gameplay and exploration. Due to the Totem of Souls missing as a gameplay mechanic in Chapter 3, some other mechanics that are directly connected to it are missing as well. You cannot pay gold coins for blessing, and it's not quite clear to me why they decided to disable such features in the last part of the game. I would also argue that the boss fights are a bit out of place, and they feel like they're just there to mark a definitive end to a chapter. They're not badly designed by any means, but they do stick out of the general gameplay loop the game is creating. The end of the game, or the conclusion itself, leaves a lot to be desired, and it seems like it is being set up for possible DLC or expansion, which would be a great thing. Bloodwest is a rather short game. I finished it in around 18 hours. While the game generally promises you around 20 hours of gameplay, which you can easily get if you're set to explore every corner of the map. But what actually is in the game is great, and it's better to have a great but short game than an uninspired slog that may last 100 hours. As for the overall quality of the content, Chapter 1 remains my favorite, obviously being the best designed part of the game, especially when it comes to immersion, atmosphere, and creating a rather mysterious start for you to enjoy. Chapter 1 remains my favorite, obviously being the best designed part of the game, especially when it comes to immersion, atmosphere, and creating a rather mysterious start to your journey. I would rate Chapter 2 and 3 as very consistent and similar when it comes to the quality, but I prefer Chapter 3 for the general aesthetics, environment, and some very atmospheric and enjoyable areas like the crypts, the Great Chasm infested with demons, and the native burial grounds. Another thing that deserves some recognition is the very immersive soundtrack. Very Western themed, obviously, but sufficiently dark, ambiental and moody to create very soulful backgrounds to most areas. It's not overdone and it's not always playing, but it's introduced at fitting moments and never sticks out too much. The game also features voiced NPCs, which are very well done for the most part, and I never found them annoying or out of place. The cast does the most that is possible with a game with such limited dialogue. However, the voice lines some enemies have are great and very immersive. I feel like they greatly contribute to the atmosphere, especially if you're approaching the game tactically and stealthily, often eavesdropping on the enemies roaming around the game world. Your character will also spice up the atmosphere by delivering one-liners, something you'd expect out of 80s action movies and Duke Nukem. I'm a sucker for those, so I'm physically incapable of disliking them, but I find them a bit too overbearing, especially for picking up items or for basically every headshot. The one-liners lack the immortality and sheer coolness of Duke Nukem, but I'd still rather have the game with them than without them. So is Bloodwest worth your time? Most definitely it is. It's one of the most refreshing and fun games I've played in the last few years, proving once more that an artistic vision can mean a lot more, even with modest technical capabilities, than bloated AAA titles that bring nothing new to the table except old and boring gameplay loops, predatory monetization, and politics forced into games. Some people might dislike the Souls-like approach to it, with no safe scumming or other similar mechanics, but for me it makes the game more challenging and therefore rewarding as well. There are not many games that force the player into this very well thought out and methodical approach generally, and especially to combat. The Souls-like touch and the fragility of the player really help to bring that point home. As it stands right now, the game seems to have a bit of a streamlined way it's meant to be played, or better said, progressed through. The The first chapter rewards stealth, as you start with basically nothing and every bullet and arrow counts. In the later chapters, a slower boomer shooter-like approach becomes viable as the resources become more abundant. You can definitely swoop through the later parts of the game with just aggressive firearm and explosive play, and the whole preparing yourself for an encounter approach from chapter 1 seems to not carry over too much to the later parts of the game. In some aspects, it really reminds me of a slower cultic, since I found myself approaching encounters in that game tactically as well. However, the great thing about Bloodvest is that it really remains rather challenging. Even when you're maxed out and near the end game, you can get killed very easily if you're not careful. For what it is, an open world stealth shooter, Bloodvest is one of the closest games when it comes to the whole Stalker-like gameplay loop. Great combat, satisfying exploration, smart and well-designed mechanics, it's all there. I would recommend this game to basically anyone looking for something different and refreshing, especially to people who loved games like Stalker and Thief. All that you need is a little bit of imagination and the ability to let the game pull you into its orbit.